Okay, I know. I keep promising y'all folks a video discussing the CFR, and I've really been working on it. I'm just finding it a little bit more time consuming to organize all the research I've done than I originally planned. But in the meantime, uh, I was in a discussion a few nights ago uh, regarding Common Core. If you're not familiar with this, I highly suggest you get familiar with it, particularly if you have children, you're going to have children, or will ever know any children that will be subjected to it. And I've got an absolute ton of information about Common Core that's on my WordPress site, and I'll provide a link for that at the bottom of the video. Now, this video, I'm not going to specifically be going on about Common Core, because in order to do that, a proper video for that, I'd first have to discuss No Child Left Behind under Bush, and then go back to the Department of Education under Carter, then back to the Elementary and Secondary Education Act under LBJ, the New Deal under FDR, the initiation of progressivism regarding education under Wilson. And hell, before you know it, this video will be 10 or 12 hours long. It's going to be a bit longer than the first two I made anyway. So, but I plan on doing videos about that stuff in the future, discussing each one of those in a logical order. But I thought it might be interesting as a primer to do a video talking about my own personal experience with public education. I like to call it government indoctrination. That's right, folks, you heard it. I too am a victim of government schooling. Sorta. Alright, well, I was born in 1965, and I was in preschool by 1969. So, what a dumbass term that is, preschool. Some would say, while we were lower middle class, I was somewhat fortunate in that at the time, and this didn't last very long, but I had a stay-at-home mom back then. Of course, the old man was working a full-time job and at least two part-time jobs in the late 60s and early 70s. But by the time the mid-70s rolled around, up until Reagan took office, that full-time job for my dad was gone. He was working three part-time jobs, and my mom was back to work full-time. This ain't a video about that shit. But I just thought a little background order might help. But I'll say one more thing about that in the early years. And I'm only speculating on my conclusion here. As I said, I was born in 65. My little brother was born in 67, and my baby sister was born in 68. So by the time 70 came around and I was shipped off to kindergarten, I think my mom was, fuck this shit, I'm going back to work. No, that was really because of necessity. My mom went back to work because her and my pop had to feed the kids. And I personally think my mom would have been a better mom, and we would have been better kids if she had the option of staying home. But, back to the topic here. I was born naturally curious and inquisitive, imaginative. Some even would say that, I had a natural intelligence. Of course, there's a lot of people out there that argue I was born with a natural stupidity. But I'm not going to pretend like I remember a whole lot about those early years. But I do know that by the time I went to preschool, I was already reading, mostly billboards, comic strips, cereal boxes, stuff like that. But my mother's told me that I was already attempting to read the front page of the Washington Star. That was a newspaper back then. It's gone now. I knew my phone number, could write it out. I could spell my street name. I could write my first and last name. I wouldn't say I was a literate genius or anything, but I was well ahead of the other kids that were in preschool with me. I could start battling on about all those other morons who still had a hard time not shitting themselves, but that's not really the point. I'm sure they were right where they were supposed to be at that age. Like I said, I was just really curious and had a real desire to learn shit. I was, a unique individual. that thirst for learning lasted pretty much through most of my elementary school days, up until about fourth grade. And I gotta throw this in here. My first crush was on my third grade teacher, Mrs. Wells. And back then we still called single ladies Mrs. It wasn't offensive back then. But she was hot. Mid-20s from California, blonde, blue-eyed angel. She drove a '60s Corvette. You know, she was straight out of a Beach Boy song, actually. But lucky for me, the summer between third and fourth grade, she got switched from being a third grade teacher to being a fourth grade teacher. So I was in her class for 2 wonderful years. And the reason I'm bringing her up, Mrs. Wells, it's not, just because of some childhood reminiscent crush or whatever you want to call it. Nice fantasy, but it was directly because of her that any interest in school remained for me by the time I hit fourth grade. And I was just done with that shit, man. I was completely and utterly bored by that early age. I wasn't learning anything. And I was basically sentenced to several hours a day being stuck inside this cinder block room with fluorescent lights, just anxiously awaiting the ring of the last bell. I was just miserable. But some of this is probably my parents' fault. Those evil bastards had the nerve to squirrel away enough money to get me first set of World Book encyclopedias when I was about 7. It might have been Encyclopedia Britannica, but when I was around 7, we got our first set of encyclopedias. And when Mom said it was nap time, my ass was reading, not napping. And Mrs. Wells, she was young enough to be hip, but she was old enough to notice shit like a student drifting off and becoming bored, and that wasn't a mental problem. And this is serious. Back in those days, even though progressivism was beginning to dominate the school system, it wasn't nothing like it is now. I forgot where I was. If I was a fourth grader today and I acted the exact same way that I did then today, let me tell you something. My ass would have been sent down to an office where some social worker would have had a brief chat with me without my parental knowledge or consent, then send me across the hall to some school psychologist's office, again without parental knowledge or consent, or that joker would label me ADHD or some other stupid shit. Then my parents would be called in for a conference where they would be told I need further counseling and be prescribed some poisonous bullshit to keep me focused. You can bet your last goddamn dollar all these assholes that claim I have a fucking right to public education will be the exact same dickheads that would refuse me that education if my parents denied their request to have me medicated. It's bullshit, folks. These goddamn psychotropic drugs are under-tested, they're overprescribed. They're designed to do one damn thing, and that's to keep you or your kids just smart enough to function, but just dumb enough to not give a shit. They're nothing but a means to keep you in comfortable conformity, period. But anyway, going into the whole big pharma thing would just be another really lengthy topic. Back to Mrs. Wells in the fourth grade. She saw that I was just truly bored. I wasn't stupid. I was way ahead of the class, as a matter of fact. I wasn't causing any trouble other than constantly questioning everything. I asked a lot of questions. And I'll admit this was a distraction. The other kids, in all fairness, they were just normal kids. They'd see me close my book, put my head on my desk or something, staring out the window. They just figured, well, shit, if he doesn't have to learn this shit, why do I? The thing is, I already knew it. Do you guys remember back when Mom would cut up those brown grocery bags and make the book covers? And Mrs. Wells was a pretty smart lady. She called my parents in for a private teacher-parent discussion where I was actually invited to participate. And she offered a couple of really brilliant suggestions. One of them was she'd let me have a desk in the back corner of the room, not outside of the class where I'd be noticeable, conspicuous, but where I'd be less conspicuous. I wouldn't be in the middle of the room where everybody could just stare at me. And the second thing she did was she told my parents to make up those paper bag book covers for me. let me bring in some books of my own choosing to read when I was getting ahead of the class and getting bored. She thought that would keep me engaged. And if the other kids, they don't notice that I'm not reading the same thing that they're reading, they don't think to complain. They just think I'm doing the same thing they are. And of course, the third suggestion was if there was any indication that I was falling behind in the actual curriculum of the classroom, my parents would be called back in. We'd all sit down and make adjustments and reevaluate the situation. So, when I think about Mrs. Wells, it's more than just reminiscing over a childhood crush. There are far too few teachers like her in the schools today, and that's by design. In addition to her efforts to keep me focused in her class, for the moment, she also had some foresight. She was part of this experimental thing. It was experimental back then for kids entering 5th and 6th grade, which, that's still elementary school, 5th and 6th grade. Then you go into junior high school. But, you go to one classroom, you have one teacher, you learn a bunch of different elementary crap, and then you go home and then you repeat the same thing tomorrow. So, and this is probably what I'm getting ready to discuss is probably fairly common nowadays, but it was new in my day. I think now they call it gifted students program or something similar to that. But anyway, this type of thing was, pretty new and experimental. At least it was in Fairfax County back in the mid-70s. So in 5th and 6th grade, I'd report to my main classroom with my main teacher, and most of my subjects would take place there. But during the day at some point, I'd get up, I'd change classrooms, and I'd have another teacher for math. And then another point of the day, I'd get up, go to another classroom, and I'd have another teacher for science. It's similar, to what most of us experience when we get into middle school or junior high school. And like I said, this probably doesn't seem like much of a big deal now, but it was pretty miraculous for me at the time. It kept me engaged. It's a simple little adjustment like that kept me focused. And, it helped quench my thirst with water rather than hand me a bucket of salt. So, other than dealing with the bullies in the bathroom, picked on me for being the smart kid, that little adjustment got me through those 2 last years of elementary school. But I want you to think about this for a second. I mean, goddamn, by the time I was 10 years old, this is before the Department of Education took over and before No Child Left Behind, before Common Core, I already knew this one-size-fits-all approach to education was complete horseshit. I mean, it damn sure wasn't working for me. But I was just lucky as shit, that I had a really good teacher, Mrs. Wells, and extremely fortunate to get this alternative. Y'all think the vast majority of kids in government schools today would consider themselves lucky or fortunate? Nope. Alright, this brings me up to junior high school. 7th grade. Some places call it middle school, but 7th grade. Shit, here we go again. Yeah, now we all get to switch these classrooms and get different teachers every 45 minutes or so. But the curriculum's the same for everyone. You still hear one yo-yo at the front of the class telling all the little subjects the pre-planned doctrine that everybody must learn at the same pace with no questions asked. And see, that's the one thing, from a very early age, just bugged the shit out of me. This teacher has no goddamn time for my questions. It's even worse nowadays. If one dares to ask questions, he's a nonconformist. We better get that little ingrate on some fucking medication. Alright, this was the beginning of the end of my government school. 2 months into 7th grade, and I was done. I just couldn't take it. I want to clarify my declaration of being done a little bit. It's not like I really had much say-so in the matter. My ass was going to go to school, and that was that. Right, Pop, you keep on thinking that. I started skipping classes, smoked cigarettes and weed, and hung out in the wood shop. Funny enough, that's our wood shop teacher. He'd burn a doobie with us. I'd actively disrupt classes I was in, etc. It isn't so much that my desire to learn had been squashed like a bug. It was more the system was all just complete bullshit. I knew it. The teachers knew it. Think they gave a shit if I showed up to class or not? No, most of them didn't even take attendance. They didn't give a damn. And I can go on about that. My theories of why they don't give a shit. Most of you can guess some of the reasons. Like fucking teachers unions they all belong to. I'd hate for some smart ass to start calling me a conspiracy theorist who hates the working man, despises teachers, and wants a nation of illiterate children. Blah, blah, blah. All right, but anyway, by the time I was halfway through 7th grade, my parents knew there was a serious problem going on here. And, don't forget, I had a little brother and a baby sister who were still pliable little conformists in the safe haven of elementary school that I was being a horrible influence upon. At the risk of getting off topic a little bit, there's a couple things I want to note real quick. By today's standards of horrible inner city schools, might not seem so bad now, but at the time the school I was in was pretty bad. There was still a lot of black-white race relation problems going on. I had a switchblade knife placed in the small of my back a couple times for my lunch money by these anti-white militant black kids, and I have no doubt some of the black kids experienced the same shit from redneck crackers as well. It was pretty bad race-wise, but oddly enough, this hatred kind of somewhat got resolved by the massive influx of all the boat people from Cambodia and Vietnam. I distinctly remember all the black and white kids banding together to fight off all those evil chinks moving into our schools. But, there was some pretty violent episodes at the school. But right around midway through 7th grade, my parents got an opportunity to move us out of Falls Church, which was, and it still is, it's a pretty cityfied area within Fairfax County. And we moved out to Dale City, which is a more rural, is a planned community within Prince William County. Prince William County is much more rural. And again, I'm having a hard time trying to stay on topic, but it's difficult to get you to understand the big picture without giving some kind of background scenery. So when I talk of Dale City, you got to realize that my Dale City during my time, it's like comparing Earth to Venus. You see some similarities, a couple things still look the same, but straight up they're just two completely different worlds. But comparing Dale City of then to Falls Church of then is equally similar to trying to compare two different worlds. I mean, it's just really a lot different. Okay, but growing up in Dale City back in the 70s and early 80s, it was a lot like being Tom Sawyer. I could walk out my back door and within 100 feet, I'd be in some pretty thick woods. I could walk next to a 5-foot-long black snake or a 2-foot-long copperhead, whatever, dip my pole into a pond or a creek, do some fishing. It was just like that. It was really nice. Now in that same spot, there's goddamn Kmart, McDonald's, and all that crap, strip mall bullshit. But just understand, when I'm talking about Dale City, I'm talking about back then. And although it is a lot different now, it's grown up. But in regards to the topic of education, I doubt a whole lot's changed. Here I am in 7th grade. I'm in a new school in a completely new environment. I'm looking around and going, wow, this is kind of neat. But instead of going to school on this 9-month schedule, like most of us are accustomed to, we were on this crazy color-coded thing. School was all year long, 12 months of the year. Not exactly. Let me get back to that for a second. But one thing that has changed since then is it's gone back to the traditional 9-month a year, whatever it is, system. But back then, depending on what subdivision you lived in within Dale City, you were on a color code. You were either red, blue, green, or yellow, or it might have been orange. I don't remember if it was yellow or orange, but one or the other. 4 colors depending on which subdivision you lived in. And I was on red. So I had the entire month of August off, the entire month of December off, and then a couple of weeks scattered throughout the year off. And arguably, red was the best color to have. We had Christmas and baseball. But like I said, they've done away with that now, and it's back to the traditional school system. 9 months of the year and then the summer off. But there was a good reason why they did it that way back then. Dale City was a planned community, like I said, and it was extremely popular back in the late 60s and early 70s. The vast majority of the people who flocked to these communities were what we might call yuppies now, except yuppies back then, they were not only trying to, start their careers, they were having families at the same time. So there was a shitload of kids. I mean, a ton of kids in Dale City when I was growing up. So, we only had 2 swimming pools, and only one of them was outdoors, and that was a fraction of the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. So you can imagine 10,000 kids all off at the same time all summer long. What are you going to do with them? And Dale City was very government and military friendly as well, because 5 minutes away was Quantico Marine Base, 20 minutes away was Fort Belvoir Army Base, and shit, I could spit and hit Route 95, which would take you right into DC for all the government bullshit. But the property was also much cheaper then, because it wasn't developed like Arlington counties or Fairfax counties were. But getting back to the point, this color code system wasn't a bad idea for back then. Let me see here. So anyway, I'm in 7th grade, and different school, different group of kids. They all had different experiences than I did up to this point, but it's all the same shit. Some joker up at the front of the class telling me a whole bunch of crap I've already heard. A lot of it I've already debunked or argued to death. And him sending all us questioners down to the experts who deal with us troubled youth. So I never made it through that last half of 7th grade in my second school. Enter my foray was private education. My parents decided to rely on a different type of expert. This was the religious guy. This preacher fellow, he convinced my parents that I just didn't have the right structure. What I was lacking was the proper educational motivation. Let's be real quick, folks. Within 2 months, these nut jobs expelled me. And go ahead and assume I was that nutty anarchist throwing firebombs into the stained glass windows, hitting old ladies praying. Nah, I wasn't such a revolutionary back then. My high crimes were asking questions. I was challenging their authority by making them show evidence of their claims. I was a real wild thinker, guys. Too damn dangerous for them. And I'm not kidding about that. Within 2 months of me being there, I had some of the other kids, mostly stupid, gullible girls, daring to start asking questions. Now, many of you might not believe this. I mean, I'm a devout atheist, but back then I considered myself a Christian. I believed in God and Jesus and all that good shit. That's what I've been taught. But I had questions. I mean, even then I was very skeptical of this whole thing, particularly the Bible. It just drove me nuts, man. So I'd ask these idiots questions. God forbid somebody who's been taught to honor the truth actually wanting to seek the truth. So that was pretty scary for these dickheads, and my parents were quite politely asked by these men of truth and honor. It's funny, they had no women involved in this discussion, to make suitable arrangements for my lost soul. Alright, so I'm still in 7th grade. I've been in 2 different counties, 3 different schools, 2 public and 1 private. The only real alternative to public school back then was, nothing. I'm still smarter than the average bear, but I got no cave to call home. Now, I gotta interject. My home life was pretty bad at this point. It was no picnic. I didn't get my picnic basket either, Yogi. My parents were a park ranger, and even though they had best intentions, they wanted me to eat. They just couldn't figure out why I wouldn't be happy with all the other little bears and eat the ants. What the fuck do you need a picnic basket for? So yeah, living at home, it was a bit more exciting than school, but more terrifying, and it was just as disappointing. Anyway, I get into 8th grade, and it does really start moving a bit quicker from here, so bear with me. 8th grade, I get another pretty damn lucky break. My parents found out about this alternative school that was semi-public. It means they're partially funded by federal funds, very small, but partially funded by federal, um, partially funded by surplus in the state coffers, and just partially funded through local taxes and partially funded by private interest. A couple of the kids had some pretty well-to-do parents. But that was the classification of the school, was semi-public. Once again, I got to point out, unless you were wealthy back then, the choices were public school or that's pretty much it. God schools. All right, this school was called Different Strokes, and that was just a coincidence that it was had the same name as that national TV show popped up around the same time, and all the cool kids that went to regular school. So they used to make the stupid comments about who I was I Willis or Arnold? Some of them even opined that I was a faggot in drag and I was Kimberly, blah, blah, blah. Stupid shit. Nothing new to me. I figured out a long time before this came along that if you were an individual, you were a faggot. Suffice it to say, I was not one of these cool kids. So I was a faggot. It didn't matter if I was a homosexual or not. Anybody that didn't fit in was a faggot. All right, a little background on the staff Strokes. Man, these are my kind of people, not just the students, the entire school. We were on a first name basis with everybody, from the kid next to me to the teachers, all the way up to the head mofo in charge. It was a total of about 30 people, including staff. Not a single one of our authority figures was older than 30. And my history teacher played bass in a punk band. He had brain cancer, came back to teach us more, all before he was 30 years old. Our principal, I don't think that was her actual title, but we call her Bert. That's short for Roberta. She was in one of those open relationships with this dude. I can't remember his name, but he was like a part-time mentor of ours. He played guitar. He'd come in for a couple hours each week to play for us and teach us some shit on the guitar. And my English teacher, she was a beautiful, buxom redhead named Amy. Damn, that was one good-looking girl. But so far, listening to this, you might get the impression that this was a commie hangout, some kind of socialist indoctrination camp, Satan worshipping atheistic cult or something. And I'll be honest, there was a couple times since this experience happened for me that I might have agreed. It sure sounds like a hippie commune. But there's no doubt these teachers, which in all honesty, they weren't even really teachers, man. They were just mentors and friends. They actually were educators. But there's no doubt they had left-leaning tendencies. But I'm going to say there was only one other student the whole time I was there, besides myself, that I even suspect might have read Marx, much less understood it. And I don't remember any of these hippie teachers bringing up Marx. So, there's some cool hippies, but definitely swung to the left of the political pendulum. But these people really got freedom, and they understood kids, they really did. They never told us what we should think or do. They inspired us to want to think and to research shit. I mean, really, look at all the angles of everything, and they always respected our conclusions. Even if they didn't agree, they respected the fact that we went through the process of actually learned what we were doing, And I can go on giving a whole bunch of specific examples about that, but I just want you to understand these people inspired me. They really did, probably more than anybody could have at the time of my life, to be an independent, rational thinker rather than just go along, get along, member of the sheep herd. They truly did inspire me. All right, now at some point, as it gets a little confusing even to me, we had to integrate back into regular school. The tit ran dry, the funds ran out, the school was just being axed. We were all like, shit, we really got to go back into that shit. Guess now we got to start going to pep rallies and fucking cheerleaders and pretending like football jocks, blah, blah, blah. All right, I might be dramatizing a little bit, but seriously, we knew we weren't going to fit in back at regular school. I mean, all the kids at regular school knew who we were. I mean, I lived in a little cul-de-sac, about 30 townhouses. I mean, everybody knew me. They knew what school I went to. But, my girlfriend, she was in that school. And even though she only lived 2 doors down from me, it's still going to be kind of cool to see her all day. So yeah, I caved. I went back to regular school. But I had to take all these crazy bullshit tests, man, before I can go back into the regular school to determine what grade I was in. We didn't have no grades at Strokes. There was no sophomores or juniors or any of that kind of classification. A 14-year-old in the same class as an 18-year-old kid was just normal to us. None of that putting people into boxes. It just wasn't relevant to us. So trying to figure out what grade I was in didn't make much sense to me. Why can't you just offer me classes that I know you already provide and let me choose them? If there's a test I got to take to meet some state or federal requirements to determine my graduation status, I'll do that. I don't give a shit. You got to take these tests so we know where you fit in. I already told you where I fit in. I don't. I just want to learn, get this shit over with. Okay, so I took their stupid test, and I remember when I was last in their system, I was not complete for 7th grade. I was non-compliant for 8th grade, and now I'm 16, which is, I guess, roughly 10th grade age, right? Nope, according to their test, I was 11th grade aptitude, and I'll be listed as advanced gifted 11th grade student, whatever the hell that means. Oh, la-di-da, whoop-de-doo. Okay, now I know this is dragged out a little bit longer than I was originally planning, longer than you're used to from my videos, but this whole thing, it keeps going back to they think that I was the problem. In fact, they thought they understood me as a statistic, as a part of some collective, as a number, a subject of some sort, They never once considered me as an individual. That's what's wrong with this top-down, one-size-fits-all approach to education. But according to these jokers with their scientific testing, I'm an 11th grader. But I got to take this 10th grade history of government course to remain current with the standards. Okay, whatever, I'll do it. Which actually turned out to be one of my better decisions. I don't remember all my teachers throughout the schools. I don't remember their names, but there's a few that really do stand out. I told you about Mrs. Wells, the staff at Strokes. But Mr. Greer, he was my 10th grade government teacher while I was in 11th grade. He stands out as one of the good guys. Now, as most y'all are aware, whether you agree with me or not, politics is one thing I'm not really an idiot about. I get it. I always have. I get it to the point that it makes me want to vomit sometimes. It's just something that's always gripped me. I'm obsessed not only with the people who crave to rule us, but also with the people who demand to be ruled. It just fascinates the shit out of me. It has since the days of Nixon. So anyway, Mr. Greer, this guy, he was an honest guy, a freewheeling, self-proclaimed Democrat. He made no bones about that. He was a JFK Democrat. That's what I mean when I say he was honest. He, like JFK, he despised liberalism and the progressive NWO agenda type shit. He openly and repeatedly said things like LBJ was the only motherfucker to leave the White House wealthier than when he went in. He often said LBJ killed JFK. So when I say he was a Democrat, he was, but he didn't, just toe the party line either. And I'm not going to get in a pissing match over this point, but I just wanted to give a brief qualifier of him. And I considered him a mentor, in shaping the way that I look at things. He was a really funny guy. I mean, he used to say shit like he always voted Democrat simply because of his hatred of Nixon. He just hated Nixon, so therefore he voted Democrat. But I loved his class. The rest of the school, they can go to hell. Not only would I have not cared, I wouldn't have even noticed. I really enjoyed his class. Now, I questioned every damn thing he presented to us, but unlike all my teachers up to this point, except with the exception of staff at Strokes, he enjoyed that. He liked it. He got off on that kind of shit. A kid that was willing to ask questions, call him on his shit, and try to have little debates in class. Even the most idiotic questions I could post, he had this secret little chuckle going on in his head. You could just hear him. Like, this fucking pretentious little prick reminds me of why I became a teacher. He was that kind of guy. But at some point, about halfway through the year, and maybe around Christmas break or so, he asked me to stay after class. I'm thinking, oh shit, here we go again. I'm getting booted from another goddamn school. Well, I'm not going to go home and say I've been kicked out of another school. I mean, Jesus, home life is not great, but at this point, my parents, we finally had this little understanding. All I had to do was just finish. I was ahead of schedule, just finish. So things are pretty quiet on that front for a change. But all these worries in my head were all for naught. Mr. Greer, all this democracy is freedom bullshit. He turned out to be a real deal as opposed to a New Deal kind of Democrat. He told me, I'm paraphrasing, but he was not one to shy from using profanity. And this is essentially what he told me. You're one intelligent motherfucker. You raise interesting questions that get me, the teacher, to act like the student and examine what I'm saying, But the problem is I must teach according to a specified doctrine, and I'm bound to get you to accept what I teach as the truth, even when I know what I'm telling you is not the truth. So I want to make you a deal. You do not attend my class for the rest of the year, and I will not mark you as absent. I'm scratching my head, popping a zit, farting, whatever, kid does at that dumbass age. Trying to hide my confusion about what the hell he was trying to say to me. And I started to ask, what are you? And then he continued, listen, kid, you're light years ahead of your peers when it comes to getting this shit. You're the kind of kid who might make an actual difference someday, but not today and not in my class. I must teach a certain spin on what government is, and it's my job to get these kids to accept what I say as the truth. But here's my offer to you. Don't come back to my class. You meet me in the teacher's lounge each Monday morning, and I'll have your week's assignments for you. And you show up on Fridays every week, keep your fucking mouth shut, take the goddamn test I give you, and hand in your fucking weekly assignments. And if you can do that shit, I'll make sure that I'm your teacher next year for your senior government class and offer you the same deal. And then he had a side note there, and he said, I'd love to sit down with you on our time, not classroom time and all that shit, to discuss politics with you. I mean, he knew that I was just really interested in it. So for the rest of the year, that's what I did, man. I embraced his offer to talk politics with him. He must have really been annoyed with me. Looking back now, I'd go into the teacher's lounge during his lunch break to shoot the shit with him about dumbass stuff. And, I must have been a real annoying dork. But here's the kicker. I took it upon myself to use his suggestion to include all those fucking retarded classes they wanted me to sit through. I said, fuck them all. I didn't even ask permission, I just said straight up, fuck it. It's my goddamn time. They get paid to be here. What the hell am I doing? What the hell am I getting out of this? So, I pretty much just hung out in the art lab for a while each day. All these underappreciated plain Jane pretty girls were. I'd hang out in the wood or plastic shop or whatever. I could make a cool bowl or bong if I was bored. I'd hang out in the cafeteria or I'd meet up with the stupid jocks, man. And these dopes all gather around the cool table talking about their big win coming up. Some clap-ridden cheerleader they were banging. Speaking of, I used to stop by the girls' locker room too to sell them weed. And I'd get a kick out of talking to one cheerleader, telling them about how I heard her boyfriend overheard her boyfriend in the cafeteria talking about getting a blowjob from a cop or something last night up at the Pizza Hut. But for the most part, around lunchtime or so each day, I'd split and I'd head over to the public library down the road. I'd read. But I did faithfully every single Monday. I'd go in and pick up my assignments for a week. And I'd go back on a Friday and I'd take all their dumbass tests. I'd sit through each one of their classes on Friday just to take the tests. And okay, now for much anticipated punchline of all this. 2 months before I was supposed to graduate. Now, keep in mind, these jokers, by their test, they said I was in 11th grade when I went back into the system. I needed to take a 10th grade class, but now at this point, I'm a 12th grader. I pretty much skipped the whole grade in between there somewhere. However that shit works, whatever. But 2 months from getting their dipshit piece of paper, wearing a faggoty ass robe and cardboard hat that they wanted my hard working parents to pay for, I'm suddenly ineligible to graduate with my senior class because you have not met all the requirements needed to graduate. One or more of the following requirements has not been made by the applicant. Applicant? I didn't apply for this shit. I never asked to be a part of it. But anyway, here it is. 10th grade level physical education. These dick-faced idiots wanted me to take a summer school PE class and then graduate with next year's class. And I told them to go fuck themselves. I went down to Annandale High School back in Fairfax County. About a week later, I took the damn GED test. I finished about 3 fucking hours ahead of schedule. About a month later, I got my damn results in the mail, which I really didn't give a damn about. I knew I passed it. But I did find it a little funny that I scored in the top 2% of all Virginians who took the GED that period. All right, that's pretty much the story of my experience with government schooling. Most of you right now are probably asking, well, what the hell's your point? There's a couple of points here. One is I made it through their dumbass system. It certainly was not the traditional way, but I made it through their goddamn system. I met all the requirements, and I've got a piece of paper upstairs somewhere noting that. Another point is I damn sure did not do it on their terms. I didn't do it, which is more important, the way most kids are forced to do it. I did have a couple of breaks. I never once gave a shit if I made it through their system or not, but it just didn't matter to me. Would I have regretted that later if I didn't finish high school? I don't know, maybe. I doubt it though. But another interesting point is I really did get a couple of lucky breaks along the way, even though I didn't do shit the traditional way, and I'm certain I was a pain in the ass through the whole process. I didn't do it the way most kids are forced to do it. I got really lucky with Mrs. Wells, Different Strokes, and Mr. Greer. Those are the most notable breaks I got. And with all the problems I had at home, I did have good, caring parents, which is another thing that's lacking a lot in kids' homes these days. So, of course, many kids just float through. They never buck the system. They never question what they're being told, and they wind up being good little citizens for the state, whatever. But far too many kids they're just floated through the system. God forbid we have a child left behind. Who gives a shit if he can read or not? We need him to feel good. Give him a pill, tell him he's just like everybody else, and move him on to the next grade. My experience was quite unique, and most kids are not as fortunate. But, however, there's a lot more alternatives available today than there was in my time, and parents have got to start researching these alternatives. Now, anyway, this goddamn video ran a lot longer than I intended it to. I hope you weren't completely bored with it, and I hope you were able to get something out of it. And that's it for this one. I'll see y'all soon, and peace.